What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. I am your host, Ryan Weisse, and after a week off where I had to do some traveling done, Austin got some traveling done, we are back and ready to rock with Mock It Like It's Hot, and it's the beginning of the month, so that means it's time for another best ball mock draft, and the timing could not have been better because my co-host, Austin Amandolia, just released a novel on best ball drafting that I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about in the show. But first and foremost, Austin, how are you doing this morning, buddy?
Doing great. I also just got done watching the Dynasty after party. So, I'm like just getting my head in the game after party vibe. You're supposed to stay up late. And now I'm like ready to go in this morning.
I love it. I love it. So we're going to talk a little bit about Dynasty After Party at the end of the show when I kind of intro everything that's going on. But we have a wonderful Dynasty show now that you guys should check out live every Sunday. And Austin, one of my favorite things about this show is our interaction with the community and our interaction with our drafters. We have drafters who join us every single week, and sometimes we get those drafters on the show, and that is what happened this week. We're going to welcome Benny Bestball to the show. Couldn't have picked a better episode to get him on the show. Benny has drafted with us just about every draft, I think, this entire season of Mock It Like It's Hot. And for best ball content, you can't find a really better Twitter follower, so make sure you're following this guy on Twitter. But Benny, welcome to the show.
Hey, I appreciate you guys. You guys give me a nice hour-long break every Monday at work. Set it on my calendar every morning. So really appreciate you guys, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I love that. So many people say that, and I kind of put that in my tweet today. What else are you going to do this morning? Why wouldn't you want to just draft with us? And so, guys, as I mentioned before, it is going to be, and Benny, you got some fans, Twitter legend, Benny Bestball. I love it. Bringing the fans to the show. And then our buddy Kevin, you're real?
Yeah.
You had no idea.
Yeah, Kevin, he's probably in disbelief right now. So
yeah, I was going to say, Kevin, one of the best Twitter follows for those that don't know. Agreed. He's winning awards for how great he is. Make sure you guys are following Devy Royale, one of the best Devy guides out there, and they're getting ready to break down their top 25 college football coming into the following season. So you definitely want to make sure you're following Devy Royale right after you hit follow on Club Fantasy. Head over there. Make sure you're following them as well. So, folks, we have a best ball draft today. So if you've never joined our show, we model our drafts after what they do on Underdog. Sure, we could just do an Underdog draft, but we're loyal to Sleeper, so we're just going to do it on Sleeper. If you're not familiar with best ball, we're going to explain that all throughout the show. We have 12 drafters today with 30 seconds a pick, so you're going to see some auto picks out there, but thankfully we have a full draft. So before we get started talking about best ball, I'm going to go ahead and get the draft started. Yes, Sleeper, I am sure I want to start the draft. 30-second clock. Brody's in the room. I imagine the pick's going to be made. So, Benny, the first question I want to basically ask you is, can you explain best ball? We have a lot of viewers that are following us over from all of our Dynasty content and getting ready to start joining us from Redraft. But best ball is a little different. So just kind of walk through what best ball is for folks.
So best ball, you do a main draft. You don't have to worry about any in-season transactions or anything. What you draft is what you get the rest of the season. And then pretty much from there, it'll optimize your lineup each week and make sure you have the highest scoring lineup there. And depending on structure, it'll be end of the year. You are against a 12-person league, or you're doing a tournament. There could be some playoff implications, but you're never setting a lineup. You're never doing any transactions. You're just drafting and going. And I appreciate it because I blow a lot of roster management in my seasonal leagues. So it's kind of your best friend when you do that.
Yeah, we hear so many people out there who's like, I can never make the right decision when it comes to this or that, and best ball kind of takes care of that for you, right?
Absolutely.
Now, Austin, best ball drafting is quite different from redraft drafting. So I would ask you just kind of explain to a lot of our folks out there who are, used to 15 roster spots, choosing starters every week. What are some of the key differences when you're looking at a best ball draft?
Yeah, I think one of the major differences that folks should pay attention to is in best ball, you are looking for the ceiling outcome. Every week you get the most points from all of the players on your team. And so you want to target those players that are going to give you that ceiling on a consistent basis. Redraft, we tend to be a little bit more, let's focus on the floor because we have to make decisions and we want to be able to predict better. But in best ball, you can be more risky because it doesn't matter if Mike Williams gives you 4 points one week, as long as he gives you the 40 the next week, right? You're aiming for that big outcome. And so in many ways, you can be more aggressive on going after those players that are more volatile.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, and we've kind of been alluding to that even in like fantasy articles for I would say the last 4 or 5 years, where you'll see something like he's a better best ball player than he is a redraft player because I don't have to guess which weeks he's going to be great, which weeks he's not going to be great. Taking a step back, Benny, I noticed, everyone knows your Twitter handle, Benny Bestball. And I feel like when we jump into fantasy Twitter and we try to establish ourselves, we all try to like find our niche. I was like, for me, I jumped into defense and special teams. The fantasy footballers were, I was lucky enough for them to give me my first shot. And nobody wanted to write about defense and special teams. I was like, well, I'll write about defense and special teams. You jumped right into best ball. And I don't know that there are too many people out there who jumped right into best ball. So what was your motivation, or why do you just prefer best ball content to others? Because like I said, if you go through your Twitter timeline, I love something you just did a week ago where you kind of broke down your very first best ball draft of the season before we knew bye weeks, before we knew free agency and the draft. And I like that your content is very focused on helping people get better at best ball. So
yeah, that's the main goal of the Twitter account. I mean, it's a little less advice and more so just what I do and trying to learn from my mistakes, because I make plenty of mistakes in drafts. Just about every draft you do, you're going to make a mistake. And it's about not tilting and getting past it and coming up with a plan B or C, D, all the way to Z, so you can really maximize your roster. But I really got started in best ball in 2019 when Lamar Jackson went off. So that's when I really expanded from like my 1 or 2 home leagues or dynasty leagues for that matter to really focusing on best ball. I think I only did about maybe 20 entries to whatever their best ball mania equivalent was, the millionaire contest. And I had about 70% advance rate to the playoffs in 2019 because I drafted Lamar Jackson in every single draft, which I wouldn't recommend doing that with any player anymore. But looking back on it, it worked. People didn't really know what best ball was or how to, like, really the upside argument that Austin had just made. People were drafting it like redraft and not really realizing you can't really make any roster moves or anything. So that really set me up because I did make a couple teams to the finals even. The payout floors were like smaller than what Underdog would be now, but that really set up my bankroll for about 3 years. Kind of running low a little bit, a couple break-even seasons, but I mostly play tournaments, and you can't really ask for much else. It's not really a ROI play for me. It's more of a let's try to win $1 million.
I think you've hit, and I love that too. I call it my lottery ticket, and that's how I do it too. I'm like, what's going to happen? But Austin, I have so many different directions I want to go right now, but you said something really smart, Benny, that I want to lean over to Austin with, because Austin, you've talked about that for a while. So Penny said, it's not really an ROI play for him. You've talked about this with DFS forever, and you've kind of started talking about it with best ball recently, about how you use the smaller sit and go tournaments to build your bankroll. And then obviously you view the bigger tournaments as your cash cow, if you will, or your lottery ticket. So just talk a little bit about that, like the differences between the two tournaments, Austin.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Benny, you bring up a good point, because it's like, what is your goal when you're playing best ball leagues or when you're playing DFS? If your goal is to have a return on your money and to make money, then you're going to play differently than if your goal is to just have fun and take your lottery tickets for the tournament. So my goal is to make money. And so I will balance the contest I enter between these smaller 3 to 12 team leagues and the tournament leagues. And I'll even be more choosy about which tournaments I enter, because I think my likelihood of winning $1 million in Best Ball Mania is incredibly low, because it's an incredibly challenging tournament to advance in and even get to the finals. And so I will spend more money on a smaller tournament because I think my chances of advancing are higher. For example, the Chow Chow was running on Underdog earlier this year. And the way that tournament works is, I believe, the top 2 advance out of a league of 12 in the first round. And then you have to be the top team out of 8 teams to advance the next 2 weeks after that. That's much easier than Best Ball Mania, where you have to be the top 2 out of 12 and then beat the top team out of 16 2 consecutive weeks to make it to the finals. And furthermore, when you make it to week 17, in the Chow Chow, if you beat 50 people, all of a sudden you're making thousands of dollars, right? Because it's a smaller final. Whereas Best Ball Mania, you could beat 50 people and you're still just rocking at the same like lowest amount to make it to week 17. So I look at it that way because I want to figure out how I can make money. And also, like, I use those smaller tournaments, the sit and go ones, to make sure that I'm breaking even as much as possible. And so then it also allows me to feel like I can be more aggressive on those tournaments. But it all depends on your goal.
Yeah, I was going to go back to what Benny said, because this was the other part I wanted to go with this. You have hit on a nerve, I think, for so much of the fantasy industry without even realizing you were going to do it. When we jump into something and we have success, whether it's a player or a tournament style, we latch onto that. And it's such a good learning experience, because my next question to you is, you said you jumped into best ball at the perfect time for Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
Did you overdraft Lamar Jackson in 2020 when he took that step back? Because I think that is a trap that we fall into in the fantasy industry quite a bit.
Not really. No,
Oh,
it's more trying to find the next Lamar Jackson, which doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I know we spoke about this a little before, but it's not really about the player. It's about where you can draft that player.
Yeah.
So, I mean, since then, I guess you could say I've been trying to draft the rushing floor quarterback.
Yeah.
Let's
say it probably worked out for Jalen Hurts
10.
last year.
Oh,
So,
yeah. I definitely have a type for
Yeah.
my quarterbacks, but just going back on the whole ROI thing and how Austin does that with best ball. I try to do that more so with like my dynasty and redraft leagues,
Okay.
because I know I was half joking about the league management, although I blow a lot of league management decisions. But I do have kind of an edge, especially in the leagues I play in, where I do have to set lineups with my dynasty and redraft. So that kind of sets me up to enter more tournaments kind of at will.
Now, normally I save your guys' teams for the end of the draft, but I'm also a big proponent of giving the viewers what they want. So you each got called out for your first picks of the draft. So Benny, I'm going to jump to you first. I have this right. Benny, Cooper Kupp at 5. So I don't know if we are thinking that's too high for Cooper Kupp, or if Brody is shocked that Cooper Kupp made it to 5. But let's talk about Cooper Kupp at 5. Cooper Kupp, as our Chris Molina loves to point out, was on pace to be the wide receiver 1 again last year before he got hurt, and then the Rams completely fell apart. So let's talk a little bit about Cooper Kupp at 5.
Well, I don't know if you noticed my little Rams poster. Oh, there's my head. I can't figure it out. Rams.
It
there
happens.
You go. But he was definitely on pace, and I would say the key differences from Cooper Kupp last year versus this year, when he was a top 3 consensus pick, was their defense got worse and Stafford's actually throwing this summer. So that kind of sets up perfectly for a wide receiver 1 on an offense. Although I wouldn't expect 2021 numbers, because those were crazy. So
the viewership is harsh today. They're calling Kupp at 5 a reach. Normally it's me who has to be mean, but today it's the viewership. So they're not loving Kupp at 5. And then, to be honest, Austin, I don't know that they love AJ Brown at 7 or whatever, 8, wherever the hell you're picking right now. It's too small on my screen. But let's talk about AJ Brown, Austin.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so first off, let's be very clear. Underdog ADP is vastly different than Sleeper ADP, and that's one of the biggest, I think, the disconnects right here in the mock that we're doing right now. Like, Cooper Kupp by Underdog ADP is number 5 overall. AJ Brown by ADP, he's going at the 8.7. So was in the 8th spot, and I was basically choosing between, do I want to go the Stephon Diggs? Auto pick. Oh well,
it happens.
It happens.
It's a mock draft.
We'll pivot. I was deciding between AJ Brown and Stephon Diggs at that spot, and I decided I want to see what happens when I draft AJ Brown this draft and stack him with Jalen Hurts and go that direction. This is a contest that I really like for Week 17. We're going to get into kind of like the strategy behind that later, but I'm looking at building a team around the Philadelphia-Arizona Week 17 matchup. Just cards on the table, so you can snipe me all you want, but I think I'll be able to make it happen. So yeah, that's really why I went with AJ Brown there. And also, like, again, in a format where we're valuing touchdowns a lot, like AJ Brown is going to be one of the primary touchdown targets in that offense still, I believe, and he's going to get the yards, he's going to get the deep targets downfield. So I'm willing to take him at the 8th spot.
And I think it's important to realize, like, first and foremost, Austin, you're still on auto. You want to get yourself off that before you get back around. But secondly, I think it's very important to realize that was the first year of those guys together. We could legitimately see growth out of that team. I do think when you look at the three primary targets, Brown, Devonta Smith, and Goddard, someone's likely to take a step back, probably each week, maybe not for the season, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how all of the targets shake out there. A couple of quick reminders for the draft. We don't go over every team. The point of this show is really to talk about draft strategy and, if these guys had a strategy coming into the draft that needed to change, things along those lines. But we are going to talk about some picks we find interesting here in just a moment. But the next thing I want to ask you guys about is a concept that I think in redraft isn't really looked at a whole lot, but in DFS and best ball, stacking is arguably one of the most important things you can do. And Austin, we're going to talk about your team a little later. You started off with it, but Benny, I'm going to go to you again for the easy explanation. Let's talk about stacking. And do you go into a draft specifically looking for certain stacks or knowing at least that you're going to stack?
Definitely knowing I'm going to stack. And I mean, everybody gets sniped sometimes when you have your quarterback and you can't get your receiver partner. So when that happens, I tend to really stack my other quarterback then.
Okay.
Kind of to balance it out. But I do go into every draft thinking, yeah, I'm going to stack. No specific ones really in mind. I would say I more so look for the backdoor stacks because what I've seen, because a lot of people have been posting their best ball lineups.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I would like you to just explain what that means to folks because we talk on a lot of higher level, but there are folks out there. I was telling you the story before the draft.
Yeah.
I'm a part of a couple of Facebook groups. Make fun of me, Kevin. You always do. I'm a part of a couple of Facebook fantasy football groups, and there was someone who had the courage to just flat out ask yesterday, what is best ball? And I don't think I think we spend a lot of time talking to the 1% in the fantasy industry when I want to focus on the 99%. So explain stacking and then specifically backdoor stacks.
So really stacking, that's when you pair your quarterbacks or a team in general. I kind of don't abide by just the quarterback wide receiver. Like if I have 3 players on the same team, I'll say I stacked that team.
Okay.
But really with the quarterback wide receiver stacking, a lot of people like a regular stack would be like your wide receiver 1. So I have Cooper Kupp. So in theory, I should be looking for, not really trying to name players on the board, Matthew Stafford much later in the draft.
We allow that in
mock
drafts. You need to talk about him. This is more for the fans than it is for a good draft. So
whereas a best ball backdoor stack is when you're targeting the later round receivers and not necessarily the primary option on that offense, but you can really get some value because what I've seen from people posting their lineups is a lot of Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow stacks, a lot of stacking their wide receiver 1, where week 17, who knows who's going to catch that touchdown and put you over the edge. So I really like to zag a little bit there and get a little lesser owned backdoor stacks.
And then Austin, this is the opportunity you've been chomping at the bit for. Austin just put out an article specifically focused on week 17. And rather than me explain to you why that article matters, I'm going to let the author do it. So Austin, talk about your article and then talk about the stacking aspect to your article.
Yeah. So the article breaks down all 16 games in week 17 and really ranks them on which ones I think are ideal to target for building your team around in best ball tournaments. And the reason this matters is because if you're playing in a tournament, the goal is to win. Like you need to be putting yourself in the mindset, I'm going to win. And to do so, you need to build a team that when you get to week 17, you've kind of consolidated on 1 or 2 teams and 1 or 2 games that you think are going to have the optimal outcome to produce the most fantasy points. So for example, last year, this game was Tampa Bay versus Carolina. And if you had a team that had Mike Evans, Tom Brady, and DJ Moore on, you scored a ton of points and you probably won the tournament or placed in the top 5, which is where you want to be to really be making money. And I think my player that I want is still here. I'm going to pick them. So week 17, the whole idea is I'm figuring out how I'm going to win this tournament. And what I've done is I've just ranked each matchup in terms of how easy is it to stack the team and to target a bunch of players from those matchups. How easy is it? How many players are draftable from that team? Like, are there a lot of players you can get from that matchup or not? What I think the ceiling outcome is, like, I think Houston versus Tennessee is going to be a gross game. And I imagine that's my bottom ranked team because I don't see any upside there. But it's a very unique matchup, right? Nobody's going to be targeting Houston versus Tennessee. So there are some risks that you're going to take there. And this is essentially how I think about building my teams when it comes to tournaments is I'm going to correlate on 3 matchups. We talk about dart throws. It's like instead of playing darts where you're trying to hit this one tiny little rectangle that gives you the 60 points, it's like you've taken the dartboard and put 3 big pieces of paper on it that are different colors. And you're saying, okay, great. I'm throwing darts at these 3 big pieces of paper and I can hit those way more easily than trying to aim at this one little outcome.
And I love it. And there was, I did a Scott Fishbowl mock live with a Triple Play Fantasy and our buddy Zach last night. And one of the things they really talked about is draft like you're right. And what they mean by that is, I know I'm right about these games and I'm going to load up. And if you're wrong, you pissed away whatever money you had in that contest. But if you're right, that's a home run and that's money there. And I love that kind of mindset, Austin. So you really go in focusing on, I'm going to be right and I'm going to win this championship. Benny, you've been playing, this is what, your 4th year of best ball. Do you focus on the playoffs or are you just trying to walk out of the draft with your players?
That was really a shift that I've seen in the last 2 years with really focusing on playoffs and the shootout schedule. And I'm all aboard it. It's not necessarily I wouldn't recommend reaching for really anything, but definitely focusing on week 17 matchups and sprinkling them in when you can without reaching. That's really my go-to. Although sometimes it is hard to pull off, but I just took another ram. I'm going to get flamed again. But that's okay. But definitely focusing on week 17. And if you can focus on your 3 teams and have them kind of be like a 16-17 mashup, that's ideal. So sometimes I like to do that with go back to the Rams, like Saints, Rams, Giants, kind of stack them all together. So you get a nice week 16-17. But going with that, in week 17, I don't know if Austin has a different opinion, but I don't really like taking the same quarterback in that matchup, unless it's Superflex. Superflex is different. You definitely want to target the same quarterback because those shootouts are more valuable, but in single quarterback, not so much. You're kind of limiting yourself, in my opinion.
All right, guys. So we've reached the point where I want to ask you guys, first and foremost, I have to put Kevin's comment up because anytime anybody makes fun of Joe Zolo, Kevin just avoids the players that Joe Zolo likes. Optimal strategy. Couldn't say it better myself. Let's make sure we get this screenshot and sent to Joe very soon. So we're about, a third of the way through the draft. What I would ask you guys is take a look at the full rounds that have been completed. You can use this round if you want. I don't make dumb rules. So are there any picks that are standing out to you guys right now? Austin, I'll get started with you on this one. So are there any picks you're really seeing that are very interesting, either for reaching, for falling, anybody you're surprised by this early in the draft?
Yeah, I think the first takeaway I have is the fact that we had 5 running backs go in the first round. This is very uncommon on underdog drafts right now. By ADP, there are only 3 first-round running backs on Underdog Fantasy right now. Yeah. And I think that's something that if you're going from sleeper to underdog, you need to be aware of. Receivers are flying off the board in underdog drafts. You will get to where you're at wide receiver 50 by ADP and running back 30 is still on the board. That's the difference in how quickly these players are flying off the board. So that's the primary thing that I noticed. And then Kyle Pitts being the 3rd tight end overall, it's like playing to the host. I love this pick because I just think the ceiling there with Kyle Pitts is too good. And the value in the 4th round, I love it. Go for it.
So here, you're going to laugh your ass off when I say this here in a second. So when I watch this draft, for the most part, I watch it on our screen. And so I can't tell who people are because I'm old and my eyes don't work right. And so I was about to be like, whoever this person is, he is an undercover Club Fantasy fan because he went out and got Christian Watson, Kyle Pitts, Justin Herbert, David. It's fucking Joel, our writer. Of course, we're going to love his team. I had to zoom in a little bit and see who it was. So yes, he is not an undercover Club Fantasy anything. He is the head of our dynasty content. So he knows what he's doing here. But you bring up a very interesting point about the running backs because the 2 running backs that stood out to me, and Benny, I'm going to let you get started on this, is, as Austin mentioned, 5 running backs in the first round, which is a little surprising. But then I guess I'm very interested in the fact that Josh Jacobs, last year's RB3, has fallen to RB8. And then Derrick Henry, who everybody's afraid is just going to die at some point, is RB10 when he is perennially a top 5 running back. How do we feel about those guys specifically in a best ball format? And obviously you drafted one of them, but how do we feel about those guys falling as far as they are? Are they just an immense value at this point?
I would say so. And really, that's my big hesitation for moving McCaffrey up to my number 1 player. Because on that 2-3 turn, a lot of the times you can get your choice from a Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard. And the wide receivers there aren't exactly what I'm looking for. So I really love the value on them. And I honestly wouldn't be, by the time August rolls around, I wouldn't be too surprised if the running backs and the wide receivers kind of flip their value.
Interesting.
Within the second round, especially.
So yeah, that's a good point, Austin. Is this because we still have a ton of industry people drafting right now that we're still taking the easy values as they fall? It's just very interesting to me. Is this the year where we just see the Derrick Henry fall off, or is this the year where he just continues to be an immense value?
Yeah, I think that's
that's the question, Austin. I'm only asking you to predict the fucking future. Come on, man.
I know. I mean, I'll have to get some of my prediction boards out or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think people are just like, this is where I think dynasty starts to impact people's perception in redraft and best ball a lot as we start to focus on age over everything else. And it is true, Derrick Henry's getting older, and so this could be the year. And if you want to bet against him, sure, that's what best ball is for. You're placing bets on certain outcomes. But Derrick Henry in the 3rd round, I'm probably not going to take that most times, because I want to make sure that I get really good receivers early on. And I feel good there because the receivers drop off a cliff at some point. Whereas the running backs are way more deep. I almost, if it wasn't for Joe, I almost got David Montgomery, and I was going to love that pick where I was getting him. And so I'm still prioritizing receivers early on, but it's making it easier to draft 0 running back in best ball because guys like Derrick Henry are falling way too far.
I love it. First and foremost, we have a Derrick Henry believer in the season. Can we even call it a comeback? All the guy does is win. Yeah, exactly. Even when he only plays half a season, he's a top 20 running back because fantasy is crazy like that. And then secondly, I want to say ton of new names in the YouTube chat. Thank every single one of you for joining and watching this draft with us today. First and foremost, if you have questions, best ball questions, redraft questions, preferably best ball, please drop them in the chat. This is a show about helping other people get better at fantasy football. That was really my vision when we started this show. So if you have questions, drop them. We're going to get them answered live. Secondly, hit subscribe. I know you guys hear it from every YouTube video you watch, but it really does help us out. If we get to 1,000 subscribers, we can actually get paid for this shit. We're doing it for free right now. So try to help us out. Hit that subscribe button. We have content every single day of the week. We're actually going to have a special episode of this show tomorrow that I'm going to talk to you guys about later. But back to what we were talking about, Benny. There's been 3 more rounds now since I started this question. Are any picks sticking out to you at this point?
Just kind of going back to the differences between sleeper and underdog,
which is very important, and I love that. And I'm going to interrupt you one last time because it's what I do as a host. What I always tell folks is, and I didn't give you guys the option, mock draft on the website where you are going to be playing if possible, because everybody presents their data differently, and there is no greater influence to average draft position than the website's default rankings. And I cannot stress that enough. Now, Benny, make your point.
Agreed. Really just seeing, we'll talk about my team for a second. Calvin Ridley, Jerry Jeudy, and Mike Williams, getting all of them in the 4th round and beyond. They're typically 3rd, 4th round picks in most of the drafts I do. So we kind of focused a little bit on my team a little bit, but there were definitely a good bit of just the wide receivers falling to the 5th, which I'm not too used to. And then a subsequent almost not reach, but around difference on players like Jordan Addison and Chris Godwin made it to the 6th, but seems like a couple of the rounds are flipped in between, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot. I mean, it goes back to what Austin was saying in the differences between this and underdog is the wide receivers are falling because right now we have a bunch of drafters who are just very happy to take the running backs early. So
yeah, absolutely.
I have no idea what in the world the auto draft is doing for my buddy Brandon Hay here. But 3 consecutive tight ends. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about roster construction later, and 3 tight ends isn't a death sentence, but 3 tight ends in the middle rounds is a death sentence from me. So I think the oops of the draft might be Sleeper's auto draft AI because it's not great right now. All right, guys, the next question I want to ask you is a little bit more about strategy. And handcuffing is a very, big strategy when it comes to redraft. And I'll explain handcuffing because, first of all, it's not the greatest term in the world. We should start calling it an insurance policy. But regardless, it's when you're going to take backups to your own players almost exclusively at running back in case the first guy gets hurt. In best ball, where there are no transactions, where you have no say in what's going to happen with your team. And when you really think about it, while you do have an 18-man roster, that's still not enough players if you really think about it. Are you guys going to use your roster spots on your own players, backup players? Is there a diminished value for you in that, Benny?
Short answer, no, not really. Kind of goes back to what you guys were saying on betting on yourself. You can, especially if you're drafting a pretty good volume of best ball drafts, you don't really want your backup in your same lineup because you are actually betting against yourself. The way I kind of do it is if I have a sense that someone's injury might be popping up. I mean, everybody says they have that sense, but I'll sprinkle them into different lineups. So like Derrick Henry, for example, especially with the recent news, Tennessee with Jeremy McNichols, I believe. I'm more likely now to take Tajay Spears in lineups where I don't take Derrick Henry to kind of bake it in. So I have exposure to both, but never really in the same lineup.
Gotcha. Austin, same sort of thing. You only have 18 roster spots. Are you avoiding backups? And Austin, I want you to go into something you talked about avoiding running backs from the same matchup in your week 17 article.
Yeah, for sure. So it depends a little bit on the context of the running back room. So there are exceptions to this rule, but in general, I agree with Benny. I'm not drafting the insurance policy on my primary running back because if you take that running back, like let's say you take Christian McCaffrey with a first pick, you're taking him to be the number 1 running back. And if you think that you're going to need Elijah Mitchell, well, then you just wasted your first round pick.
Yeah.
Like, let's be honest. And so that's why I won't do it for my own team. And plus, if you don't have Christian McCaffrey and you say, okay, I'm going to take Elijah Mitchell now, you're saying I'm going to gain leverage on everyone who just took Christian McCaffrey in the first round because I'm going to have Elijah Mitchell that's bringing more points, or I'm predicting the McCaffrey injury. So it's really like when you get into the game theory of it, you want to bet on yourself. You want to say this outcome is going to happen, and you want to get leverage on other players and not try and just build depth for your own team. There are exceptions to this rule. The primary one to me is like David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. The way that those two are going to score touchdowns is totally different. And so stacking those 2 running backs, I actually feel comfortable with because Montgomery is going to be your goal line target. Jahmyr Gibbs is probably going to be the pass catching back. When it comes to players in the same matchup, if you're taking we have Cleveland and New York Jets, they play each other in week 17. So you have Nick Chubb and Breece Hall in that matchup. You might think, oh, I want both of these players because they're great running backs. And that's true. However, if you are betting on them having a ceiling outcome in week 17, what does that game look like? It probably looks like each team having like 30 rushing attempts and a very slow paced game and final score being 16-13 or something gross like that in a defensive battle. And that's not going to be conducive to the number of fantasy points that we really need to have that ceiling outcome and win a tournament. And so it's similar, like you don't do it in DFS. You're not going to do it in best ball if you're playing in a tournament setting.
No, I like that a lot. So guys, I don't think we can go much longer without talking about roster construction because there have been some interesting developments outside of the auto pick. Our buddy Phil has now taken his 3rd tight end. So Benny, let's talk. So you guys have talked about game theory way smarter than what I can even comprehend with this planning for the playoffs. But the one part of best ball that very much stood out to me when best ball theory and writing started was roster construction. How many quarterbacks, how many tight ends, and how do you split your running backs and wide receivers? So I really want to talk about your kind of thoughts around how do you go into a draft? Do you know how many you're going to walk away with, or does the draft kind of conduct it for you?
For me, the draft definitely conducts it. I really like playing the ADP game. So if someone's slipping, that'll influence my decision more than pretty much anything in a draft, as long as that player has a pulse. So really going into it, it all depends. I kind of go by, if I take, let's say, a top 5 or 6 quarterback, chances are I'm not going to take a third later.
Okay.
Really, week to week, you have to bet on the possibility that your backup quarterbacks can outscore them. And when you spend such a high draft pick on them, you don't want, that goes back to betting against yourself. You don't want to do that because you're really counting on that player to be your quarterback every week. And the same kind of goes for tight ends, although I'd probably expand it to maybe the Dallas Goedert range. If you get like Dallas Goedert and someone like Chig Okonkwo, I don't know how you're feeling about it, but I'm not feeling too great that I'm going to have a top 5 tight end every single week. So I'll probably take like a third tight end. But if I'm taking a Mark Andrews or a Kelsey, there's almost no shot I'm taking 3 tight ends.
Especially if you're going to spend the draft capital to get one of those elite guys. And I don't want to call out our buddy Phil, but Austin, just continuing with that, I'm going to have you talk about roster construction in general. But Phil spent a top 5 pick, one of his 4th pick, on TJ Hawkinson, and he got players we all like, except I know you're not a big Kincaid guy, but he grabs Hawkinson, Okonkwo, and then Kincaid. I just don't know if that's the best use of draft capital. Not meaning to pick Phil, you're just helping other people learn a lesson here. Do better next time. No.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to tight end, the decision, I'm always deciding, am I doing 2 or am I doing 3? And it's going to depend on who the first tight end I draft is. So if I draft Travis Kelce, I'm only taking 2 every time.
Yeah.
I'm never drafting 3 tight ends with Travis Kelce. Similar with Mark Andrews, there's a little bit more risk there because of his injury history. But if I'm drafting a player like TJ Hawkinson, Kyle Pitts, George Kittle, and Darren Waller, I'd put in this category as well. Those are 4 guys that we know the ceiling outcome is there, but I can tell a lot of different stories for each of those players of how they fail to meet their ADP. And so those are tight ends where I'm more comfortable doing a 3 tight end stack, but I'm not doing it in rounds 9 and 10. I'm doing it like way late in the draft and picking other like high upside touchdown guys like Gerald Everett's still on the board. Hunter Henry is going to be basically free in every draft. Dawson Knox, I know y'all don't believe it. He's still going to be a red zone target. And so that's someone I'm going for. I mean, even freaking Taysom Hill, like he's like a touchdown upside guy. He's the prime like best ball player just because of how he's utilized. And then there's just so many players late. Trey McBride, Hayden Hurst. Like I could go on and on about these late round tight ends that what you're betting on is they're going to get a touchdown or 2 here and there, and it's going to give you that ceiling outcome. So I'm willing to do it late if I take one of those other guys. But most of the time, if I don't take one of the elite tight ends, I'm just punting on it and then taking 3 dart throws later, which it seems like Benny and I are about to get in a real interesting shootout with these tight ends.
Well, I didn't want to bury the lead or what we're going to talk about at the end of the show, but I think you and Benny might have got into a shootout with Daniel Jones already. I know that broke your heart a little bit there, so we'll talk about that towards the end of the show. I want to talk a little bit about draft strategy in general. You know what? I take that back. I want to go back to the roster construction question, because I'm going to be perfectly honest, and it kind of became the theme of the show of betting that you're right. I always go 2 and 2, and everybody who knows me knows I'm going tight end early. It's Travis Kelce almost every single draft, but I always go 2 and 2 with quarterbacks and tight ends. But there is a dilemma I run into, and if you've watched this show for any period of time, you know that it's all about fixing my problems in fantasy football. So Benny, I run into a situation where I'll really like, specifically at quarterback and tight end, 2 players who have the same bye week. And I can't give you any examples right now because I'm not as smart as you guys, but it's happened a lot in even the best ball drafts that I've done this year. Is there a situation where if the value just falls to you, you'll double up at these small positions on guys with the same bye week and then force yourself to add a third? Or is that a bad decision? Because right now I'm letting the value pass me by because I don't want to add a third. Should I be looking at it the other way?
It depends. Whenever I do run into that situation, I just did that a couple nights ago as well in a Best Ball Mania entry. I took Trevor Lawrence and Russell Wilson, I believe, both week 9. Was going to stop there. I had a very big team stacks on those two.
Okay.
And just later, I mean, my go-to when that happens is just take Kenny Pickett. Why not? He could be all right.
I think that's fair. And Kenny Pickett's been one that's been a debate for me as well, because you just never know what he's going to get. But you mentioned you like the quarterbacks with the rushing upside. We've seen the kid run, so it could be interesting.
Although most of that was in one game last year. I think he had a 3-touchdown rushing game. But not a lot of the quarterbacks you're targeting really have a week 6 bye either. So
yeah, one of the interesting things I discovered when I was researching Kenny Pickett is I think he only had one multi-touchdown game last year, and it was rushing touchdowns in his second start ever. So,
yeah, that's what it was.
Austin, same question. Do you, especially specifically at quarterback and tight end, do you avoid matching bye weeks so you don't have to grab a third guy, or is the value just too much at certain players?
Yeah, it really just depends on the type of build and the value that I get. I mean, I'm not stressed too much about bye weeks, but except for at the quarterback and tight end spot. And it's just basically if I'm like, yeah, I'm stacking these two teams and these quarterbacks have the same bye week, then I'll just grab a third quarterback late, someone that I can see a ceiling outcome for a week, like even a Jacoby Brissett. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, why not? He's free. Desmond Ridder, he's free. They're going to pass the ball more. And so, yeah, I mean, I will try to avoid having quarterbacks with the same bye week, but sometimes it just happens. And so when that happens, you just get a third quarterback and it'll be fine. You just don't want the goose egg for that week.
Yeah. Like I said, it's just, again, it's about making me better at fantasy. First and foremost, if you would have bet me $1 million that we were going to have a Kenny Pickett apologist in the chat, I would have disagreed completely, but here we are. Now, did he draft? I say, did he draft Pickett? I didn't see him in the draft if it ended up on his team, but that's interesting. But I'm going to go back to Brody. Brody's been giving us the good questions here, and I think this is a great question, and you happen to just have run into it in a draft last night, and I think it's a great question for everyone in general. I happened to do a Scott Fishbowl draft last night where Russ was my first quarterback. How can we have any faith in Russ? What is happening with Russell Wilson and now the Sean Payton offense, Benny?
I mean, the lack of faith that we all have in Russ is kind of baked into his price from what he's done in the past. He goes late enough, and it's kind of a situation where his key pieces, well, mainly Jerry Jeudy, goes significantly ahead of him. He's a top 50 pick normally on Underdog. So you kind of, if you like the parts, you got to kind of like the person controlling it to an extent. Okay. I mean, I'm a Rams fan. I hated Russ. I was overexposed to him last year, but I think it's really important to not get too caught up on that. A lot has changed since then. And I really think Sean Payton, even if he takes him from being terrible like he was last year to middle of the road, it could really help him, my best ball teams, and the pieces around him. So,
which is the most important there. Yeah. Sure you do better in best ball. So. Austin, what's your take on Russ heading into the season?
Yeah, I mean, it is a scary pick to make. I would just admit that. And this Denver matchup with Los Angeles, I ranked as my 12th favorite matchup out of 16. So not very great. And most of it's the risk upside with the Russell Wilson side of it. That also means that it's potential to just win you $1 million, right? Because let's say Russ comes back and all of a sudden this offense is doing well under Sean Payton. You're going to be different. People aren't going to be wanting to stack the Denver Broncos. They might be like, yeah, sure, I'll take Jerry Jeudy. They might be like, sure, I'll take Javonte Williams. But are they going to feel comfortable taking Russell Wilson, Jerry Jeudy, Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, Greg Dulcich, and having them all on the same team? Probably not. And so that's an incredibly unique roster, which is what you need in these big tournaments. If I'm in a smaller 12-team league, I'm probably limiting my exposure to the Broncos just because in those smaller leagues, you kind of want that safety net. And so you want to say, if I'm wrong on Denver, okay, I have another team that I'm going to be right on. But in a tournament, you're saying I'm right. And so you just want to bet on the Denver Broncos, and you probably are going to be one of very few people betting on the Broncos this year.
All right, I just have to point something out. Benny, you can't convince me that you didn't see Chris picking right after you and be like, yeah, you want Kenny Pickett? I'm taking him.
I knew what I was doing.
Yeah, he has Najee Harris. He has George Pickens. I think he might be a Steelers fan, and you got him with the very next pick. So, and he took Jordan Love with his next pick. So I'm convinced that's where he was going.
I am too.
I absolutely love it. Yep. Mock drafting at its finest right there. But,
good old spite pick.
Exactly. No, I love when themes for the show emerge organically because there is no show sheet for this show. The draft guide's the show. But I think betting on yourself and betting that you're right in these tournaments, and we talk about this a lot when we do DFS, Austin, is tell yourself a story and tell yourself why you're going to be right and try to build that unique lineup around that. So I really, really enjoyed, and Chris confirming with us that Benny knew where the pick was going. All right, guys. When I run out of content and as we start to wind the draft, one of my favorite things to do is play a game of keep, trade, cut. And so we have keep, trade, cut. I try to theme it. Today, I want to talk about handcuff running backs and specifically for best ball, because we talked about sometimes they have room on their team, sometimes they don't. And I think these three guys are in a little bit of a unique situation. You could argue one of them is actually the starter and not the backup. Actually, you could probably make that argument for two of them. So I want you guys to play keep, trade, cut with Zach Charbonnet, Samaje Perine, and Rashad Penny, who all went within one round of each other in this draft. Austin, I always like to put you on the spot first so the guest has time to think about it. Zach Charbonnet, Samaje Perine, Rashad Penny, keep, trade, cut.
Yeah, you just love to put me on the spot, don't you?
Yep.
I don't know that I appreciate how much you enjoy this segment because
I like making people uncomfortable. It makes for wonderful entertainment.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I always tend to trade the player that I perceive as having the most value in the fantasy community. And so I'm trading Zach Charbonnet because I think there are enough people out there that think, oh, he's going to be this guy. He's going to take over in Seattle. And so I'm going to trade him. I'm going to keep Rashad Penny because I want the ceiling outcome. And I think that he has shown he has the ceiling outcome available to him. Like he has the potential to be the RB1. Like that's his ceiling, which is incredible. And with his value, I'll take it. Like particularly in best ball, if you're betting on outcomes, just bet on him to be healthy all 17 games and you might win your league.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to cut Samaje Perine, not because I don't love Samaje Perine. I think he's a great target in drafts right now. But I do worry that Denver is going to add another running back. I know there's a lot of smoke around Dalvin Cook going to Miami. And part of me wonders if that's Dalvin Cook's agent doing a little work saying, hey, Denver, you want to give me a little bit more money over here? Yeah. So I could see Denver signing another running back because I don't think Javonte Williams starting week 1. And so
Denver was heavily rumored for Kareem Hunt as well. Let's not forget that. And he's still out there. So
is Leonard Fournette. Like, look, these guys, there's these 3 big veteran running backs. They don't want to be in training camp right now. They want to be doing their own thing, resting. They know what to do. They can show up and be ready to go. And so I could see them getting drafted in August or getting signed in August. And suddenly the fantasy landscape's going to change.
I like it. Benny? Keep, trade, cut, Zach Charbonnet, Samaje Perine, and Rashad Penny.
I'll go a little differently here.
Okay.
So with Rashad Penny, I think I'm going to cut him. I love DeAndre Swift, and them bringing him there and not really paying Rashad Penny much is kind of leading me to believe that the split backfield will kind of favor DeAndre Swift, whose skill set I kind of like more. Although when Rashad Penny plays, he puts up some numbers. Can't argue
like 5.5 yards per carry on his career, which is obscene.
So then from there, probably right now, I would probably look to trade Samaje Perine because, like you guys both said, they could bring in a running back. Like say they bring in Leonard Fournette. I'm not feeling too great about Samaje Perine at all. So he's really in a scenario where I could only really see his value dropping. So kind of the time to get out now, get what you can, and just keep in Charbonnet to see what happens with that backfield. I do think it's going to be a Kenneth Walker-led one, but the fact they spent so much on him, they're going to use him a little bit, and Walker really hasn't proven to be the healthiest so far in his career. So I think he could reach an upside where he's a few years younger than Penny then as well. That his trade value could be huge, or you could just keep him and use him.
Yeah.
So
Always good to see smart people agree with smart people. DeAndre Swift season out of Kevin, so I think he agrees with you there. For what it's worth, I would do a combination of your two answers, so all three of us are different. Like Austin, I always look to trade the person with the most trade value, and I do believe that's Zach Charbonnet. So I would trade Charbonnet, but I would keep Pirine because I don't think they're going to bring in another running back, and I think Pirine's going to play that Mark Ingram role in this offense. And I would also cut Rashad Penny just because I believe the value's not there, the injury risk. I like Rashad Penny as a player who doesn't, but he plays 6 games a season. What are you really going to get from him? So just to keep it nice and confusing there. And that's exactly why I picked these guys. And I want to point out again, I picked these 3 guys before I saw where they were going to be drafted, and they were all within a round of each other. And I made Austin's life complete hell once again. For those of you who watch our show, you know I'm going to end the show with these guys talking about their own teams. But there is one team I want to point out because he's basically the only person who employed his strategy. And as we all know, he's always the person to employ his strategy. We're going to look at Joel's team, who I joked that I didn't even know he worked for us for a second until I saw that every one of our favorite players was drafted. Joel is the only drafter to go 0 running back. Austin, you could make a case, but he still went later than you. So Joel is our only drafter to go 0 running back. So Benny, I'm going to ask you, what do you think about Joel's team? And along those lines, do you ever flirt with going 0 running back in any of your best ball drafts?
Oh, absolutely. Going 0 RB a little bit more so this year than in previous years. It might be an overcorrection from really being a RB boomer over here, even though I'm pretty young. But so I like the setup. I mean, not Rashad Penny, I spoke to.
Let me run down his picks just really quick. So Tyreek Hill in the first round, Devontae Adams in the second, Devonta Smith in the third, Kyle Pitts in the fourth, Christian Watson in the fifth, Justin Herbert in the sixth before taking his first running back, David Montgomery, and then he goes Devin Achane and Rashad Penny as his backs. So for folks who might not be able to see the draft board, I want to let them know what we're looking at. Now you can continue. Sorry about that.
You're fine. But I mean, outside of the Rashad Penny pick, I like the process with it though, because these are the type of running backs you want to take on a 0 running back team. Because at that point in the draft, there's not going to be that bell cow running back. They all go in the first 2 rounds. So getting someone in more ambiguous backfields where an injury away, it won't go from 0, but they'll have a baseline that they'll be scoring each week with the untapped upside with injury. That's exactly what you want to be targeting when you go 0 RB. So
same question, Austin. How do we feel about 0 RB? Do you ever flirt with the idea in your best ball drafts?
I tend to do more anchor RB in my best ball drafts, just have one solid guy. But it is, like I was saying earlier, there's never been a better year to do 0 RB just because it's the way everybody's going. Everybody is valuing receivers this year. That's partially why I'll go anchor RB. But I think this is a pretty good execution of the 0 RB strategy. The one complaint I have is taking the quarterbacks as closely together as Joel did. Okay. I would have passed on Deshaun Watson and waited a little bit later just because Justin Herbert, like you're probably hoping he has a top 5 season. And if so, like you just need basically a bye week fill-in for your second quarterback. And so I would have waited a little bit longer, but overall, I think it's a good strategy. And I mean, the receiving core is really why, because in Underdog, you're starting 3 receivers plus a flex every week. And so to be able to start Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Devonta Smith, and Christian Watson every week, that's incredible. And that's why I'm loving targeting receivers early this year.
Yeah, and Joel put out an article on Christian Watson and his absolutely obscene numbers when he actually put everything together pre-injury last year. And there's a lot of potential for Christian Watson to be a top 20, top 15, top 10 wide receiver next year. And Joel, I know, is a big believer in Jordan Love. So yeah, that was the one team I wanted to break down completely just because he did a little bit different draft strategy. So as we always do, I'm going to let you guys talk about your teams. Benny, I'm going to start with you. My main focus is here. You can talk about every player if you want, or you can just talk about the ones that stand out to you. But did you have a strategy? Were you forced to change that strategy? And if you don't talk about it, I want you to talk about waiting till very late to grab your 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah, so I kind of went with more of a tournament strategy where I was focusing a little bit more on week 17 than normal. Okay. So I have some mini stacks in here with Denver and the Chargers. I think they're all like high upside players as well that could pop off any given week. Went with a little unorthodox with the Rams since I took Cam Akers as well. I didn't really want to wait for Stafford, so I just took Daniel Jones and Slayton to go week 17 a little bit there. But really, this is just kind of a classic wait on your QB and tight end, get your running backs and wide receivers figured out, which I think I did a pretty good job doing. I don't think you could really get this on Underdog with where Jerry Jeudy and Mike Williams went.
Yeah.
But really just a 3-5-7-3 lineup that little conservative going with that. But wait a second, I only took 2 tight ends.
I was just going to call you out on that. And that's what I was going to ask is if I go late at tight end, I always grab 3, but you grab 2. And it sounds like that might have been a mistake. So.
You see, when I was looking at my 3rd tight end, didn't like the options. So I just took DPJ. I really like taking DPJ this year.
There you go. I don't think
I figured he'll make my lineup more than Luke Schoonemaker. I wasn't planning on taking him, but a player like that.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Austin, what's your overall feel on Betty's squad?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it. Just again, taking in all the receivers early and getting the value. I mean, I love the anchor RB strategy too this year. Like having Pollard and Henry, you're going to be set, right? Like, I think 0 RB is a little bit risky this year because there's a lot of volatility once you get outside the top 30 running backs. But I like having Pollard and Henry. I think you could probably get Pollard at that ranking. I do worry a little bit about how high he's been going in drafts, but overall, I dig the strategy. And of course, Daniel Jones.
I wonder if Pollard's not going to get higher once we start seeing training camp and actually seeing him on the field. I think there's a lot of worry about injury right now, and we don't know when he's going to come back. I wonder if the second we see this guy in pads or even shorts, if we're not going to start seeing his ADP creep up just because of how good he was last year. So. All right, Austin, you know the deal.
Boy, this was a tough draft. So I similar to Benny was looking to do the week 17 stack and correlation, and I decided to just let the draft fall to me and see where by ADP I wanted to go with that first one. And so AJ Brown was there. So I decided, okay, we're going Philadelphia, Arizona. This is one of my favorite week 17 games to target. And so in that matchup, I got AJ Brown, Jalen Hurts, DeAndre Swift. And then later on, I did get Marquise Hollywood Brown.
I was going to say, I knew when you made that Hollywood Brown pick because we talked about you loving that game before the show even started. So.
Oh, it was so great. And then going late, got Trey McBride. That was just another great way to get into that, get some exposure to that game.
And I think by week 17, Trey McBride should be the guy there.
So. Yeah, exactly. So my draft really went awry when I got auto-picked for Amari Cooper. I do not have a ton of interest in this Cleveland, New York Jets game.
As you talked about, it could be more likely the 2 running backs pop than any other players.
Exactly. I think this is a weird lineup, but I was like, okay, let me just put myself in the mindset of I'm going to tell myself the story that we get a Cleveland, Los Angeles Chargers vibe of a game where it's all of a sudden it's 8 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, something ridiculous like that, where it's a 40-40 game at the end. And so I just leaned into that and went Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore. That's a great correlation and stack. Jerome Ford. Let's say Nick Chubb misses time because he usually misses time. Jerome Ford has a chance to get some more touches. And then I used the Jet side for my secondary stack with Lazard, Aaron Rodgers, and Tyler Conklin. So I just focused on trying to stack and limit the number of teams I was targeting and telling myself the ideal outcome for those teams. Went with 2 quarterbacks because Jalen Hurts is going to be the number 1 in my team most weeks, right? One thing I wanted to say about roster construction is when we think about drafting players, we need to think about the points they're adding to our team, not just what they're projected to do, right? So if I have Jalen Hurts, Aaron Rodgers is probably not adding a lot of points to my team. Maybe he's adding 30 points to my team across the season if things go right and Jalen Hurts hits the outcome that I'm drafting him to. And so I was willing to just go with the 2 quarterbacks. A 3rd quarterback I think would have been a wasted pick. But apart from that, not my favorite draft, but this is why I like to slow draft. That's the great thing about Underdog. You get those 8-hour picks and you can sit and you can overthink stuff way too much and just plan it all out. But these fast drafts, they go by quick.
I love that you said you love the slow drafts. I like putting people on the spot, as is fully aware of this show. So I love the 30-second clock. I avoid the slow drafts. Joel is a man after my own heart because I completely agree. You got to make the damn playoffs. And so I agree with everything Austin wrote, some of the smartest shit I've ever wrote. But I just take my guys and try to make the playoffs. But we actually have a question here. It's going to cover up the draft board for a little bit. But Happy day before the 4th to you as well, and we'll be back tomorrow. But who would you want as your keeper? Full PPR, 2 flex spots, Chris Olave for a 9th, Rachaad White for a 13th, or Deshaun Watson? Yeah, I would imagine in the 14th. So we're looking at round of values there. Benny, who would you rather have as your keeper in a full PPR league?
Probably Olave in the 9th still. That's pretty great value. I don't play in too many keeper leagues, full disclosure, but in Dynasty, like just thinking about their relative values between Olave and Rachaad White, I would imagine it's more than 4 rounds.
I'm the exact same way. I think Olave, that's how I look at it. I'm not really trying to walk out of a draft with Rachaad White, probably not trying to walk out with Deshaun Watson, but the 14th does make him a little bit more interesting. I want Chris Olave, and if I can get him in the 9th, if you're telling me I'm getting him in the 9th, I'm making that pick, Austin.
Oh, 100%. You're never going to get Chris Olave falling that far in any draft you're doing where you're starting fresh. So yeah, take Olave.
All right. And before I get us out of here and get the draft off, I'm still going to do my oops of the draft, and I'm going to pick on Brandon, but I'm more picking on the sleeper AI. Don't take 3 tight ends in the middle rounds. Middle round tight ends are a trap. You don't want 3 of them. You certainly don't want 3 of them back to back. But then, Brandon, I watched you make this pick, Mike Gesicki in the 13th and adding a 4th. What the hell are we doing, man? Now, like I said, it's almost all picking on the auto draft. But folks, middle round tight ends are a trap. They're likely to score the same amount of points as the bad tight ends. And what's actually funny is I love Freiermuth and Ingram, and I think Ingram, a top 3 or top 5 tight end last year, could still repeat once he gets over this whole contract thing. You just don't need all of these guys. You can do better with your team. Don't take 3 of them. Certainly don't draft 4 tight ends. There is no optimal best ball strategy that involves having 4 tight ends on your team. Please don't do it. Benny, an absolute amazing show. Thank you so much for coming on. We talked about this a little bit before the show. You don't really create content for any websites, but I follow your Twitter because you put such great best ball content out using, Twitter's 280 characters. So tell people where they can follow you. Yes.
Yeah. So, hey, you guys can find me on Twitter at Benny_bestball. There was already a Benny Best Ball somehow. I made that like 3 years ago. Who the heck was doing that? But I really just post my trials and tribulations in my best ball lobbies, try to learn something together. And over the season, I do a weekly thread for sports betting. And I because I do a pick'em league every year. Okay. So I kind of like to keep track with myself and really discuss every game and try to win that. I do all right in it. It's not my...
I love it. If you need proof of his content, go look at his pinned tweet right now, because he, like I said, did something I really love. We love accountability at Club Fantasy.
Yeah.
And so Benny looked at his very first best ball draft before everything in the world happened and talked about, what were hits, what were misses. But more importantly, Benny, I really enjoyed that you talked about your thought process behind it. I think it was specifically looking at the first tweet. It was your Trey Lance pick because, you mentioned Brock Purdy coming off of Tommy John. I don't think Sam Darnold had even signed yet. So Trey Lance felt like a great pick, and it probably doesn't feel so great right about now.
No, it does not. He's like that's the only lineup I've taken him to. And
there you go.
I love my receivers so much, and it just hurts every time I look at it. But whatever. I love it. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Austin, tell everybody where they can follow you and tell them what you just put out yesterday.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Austin_FFL. All of my written content can be found at clubfantasyffl.com. Yes, yesterday released the Week 17 article breaking down all 16 games for the Week 17 matchups. Even if you're not playing in underdog tournaments, it's still a useful article because to break down 16 games, you have to talk about all 32 teams. And so we still talk about players to target, which is useful for just regular best ball leagues as well as the tournament styles. I also got a Mike Evans article dropping today, which is going to be a thrill of a time because we are just drafting him embarrassingly low. His ADP needs to be higher, in my opinion. And then after that, just be on the lookout for some more best ball content. We got some stuff cooking up in the background.
Yeah. First and foremost, while I love Austin and I love his writing, we don't need to get Mike Evans ADP higher because I love grabbing him where I'm grabbing him. So let's just leave it right where it is. But it's an excellent article. I always get to be the first one to read the articles as the editor. So that's going to drop at 2:00 today. I have it all edited and ready to go. And that's a part of our Look Inside series. If you guys haven't been following along, we have player profiles. I think we're just now hitting the halfway point. So there's probably you might be the 16th article, or you might even be the 19th article coming out on the website right now. We cover a player from every single team, as well as a quick breakdown of every other fantasy relevant player from that team. So make sure you guys are checking those out on the Club Fantasy website. And then, of course, make sure you hit follow on the Twitter or on the YouTube button. I mean, you can follow us on Twitter if you want, but YouTube matters way more. We are live almost every single day of the damn week. We have such a busy schedule. Tuesdays are our Women of Fantasy Football Day. We have our Golf DFS show with Kelly and Adam, where they are just giving you excellent picks every single week. And then every other week, we have Her Story in the Making with Britt Flynn. That is our combination show with Fantasy Alarm, and it's on the Better Sports Network as well. You definitely want to check out those shows. Wednesday is our flagship show, no pun intended. We are continuing our Look Inside series where we cover 3 teams every week. This week it is Tampa Bay, Seattle, and Miami. Every Sunday, we now have our live Dynasty show, and that's with Joel and Michael Sicoli. Their new episode last night, they just covered Washington, Pittsburgh, and Detroit. And of course, this show every single Monday. We will be back next week. We're going to do some more redraft content next week, but way more importantly, because of some of our great followers, we're actually going to do a special episode at 11 o'clock tomorrow with a Scott Fishbowl mock. The slow drafts for Scott Fishbowl kick off next week. I want to give some people some mock draft practice, so we're going to have a good time with that. Make sure you tune in at 11 o'clock tomorrow. It's early on the 4th. You're probably not drinking yet. You have plenty of time to come on and enjoy the show. So thank everybody for drafting with us. Thank everybody for watching the show. For Austin, for Benny, I'm your host, Ryan Weisse. Always remember that defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. We'll see you tomorrow for the next mock draft. Have a good day. Have a nice 4th.